The problem was Eric Reid and Colin Kaepernick said their issue wasn't with the NFL. So if your issue wasn't with the NFL, but the NFL is saying they're suffering because of your actions and you're employed by them, you're ostensibly saying your employer who employs you, who you need to pay you is saying you're affecting their bottom line. And in essence, you're saying, bump you. I don't give a damn about your bottom line. I'm going to do what I want to do while I'm in your league with my hand out for your money. Now, that's not the real world.
What's up, guys? It's Coach JB, and on this episode of Out of Bounds on Uncommon, we're listening to Stephen A. Smith talk about the importance of professionalism. Let's check it out.
Spectrum. On one side, there are those who question why Jay-Z, Roc Nation's founder, would team up with the NFL while Colin Kaepernick remains unsigned by a team. And, well, that issue was addressed yesterday.
We forget that Colin's whole thing was to bring attention to social injustice, correct? So in that case, right, this is a success, right? This is the next thing, right? Because there's two parts of protesting. You go outside and you protest, and then the company or the individual say, I hear you. What do we do next? Right? So for me, it was like actionable item. What are we gonna do with it? Like everyone heard, and we hear what you're saying, and everybody know, I agree with what you're saying. So what are we gonna do? You know what I'm saying? So reach millions and millions of people, or we get stuck on Colin not having a job. If you can provide effective ways to push a conversation forward and help people at the same time, that I'm really into action. You know, I'm really into like real work. I'm not into like how it looks.
Jay-Z said he did speak with Kaepernick, but he would not talk about a private conversation to the media. Now let's toss it back to First Take.
All right, you just heard Jay-Z there on the NFL's new partnership sitting next to Roger Goodell. Well, Colin Kaepernick's former teammate isn't having it, tweeting this. You and some others seem to misunderstand that we had no beef with the NFL until they started perpetuating the systemic oppression that we are fighting by blackballing Colin and then me. Now, I won't quit playing, but I'll be a royal pain in the NFL's expletive for acting like they care about people of color by forming numerous disingenuous partnerships to address social injustice while collectively blackballing Colin, the person who brought oppression and social justice to the forefront of the NFL platform. Reid added the fact that Jay-Z has the audacity to say that. I think that we've moved past kneeling is ridiculous, and he's actually capitalizing off of Kaepernick's loss. Max?
Yeah.
Does Reid have a point?
Of course he has a point. He has a couple points. First of all, Jay-Z capitalizing off loss. He is a capitalist, as Stephen A. likes to say. I could sell water to a whale, put me anywhere on God's green earth, I'll triple my worth. Jay-Z is doing two things here. It's a muscular move, and it is very American. You know, you can change and also make a buck at the same time. And he's doing that. And Jay-Z's also proving what he said, Stephen A. By the way, Reid is wrong about Jay-Z sacrificed nothing. He turned down the halftime show. That's a big deal. And said he's not going to do it. I mean, he benefited from that too. But still, that is something. That's not nothing. And he was proven right. I don't need you. You need me. Because look what really happened. Who benefits more from this situation? Really the NFL, kind of co-opting the social justice issue. But of course, in co-opting it, it also means something will be done about it. Money will be put into it. Resources will be put into it. Attention will be given to it. And that's good. And Jay-Z also has a legitimate point, but we can't pretend Reid doesn't. First of all, on the issue of him still talking, even though he's employed by the NFL, he has every right to do so. Why should he not take a job in his chosen profession, a league which is supposed to represent only really the best football players in the world? Why else would anything go into that? Like, that's why you're in the NFL, because you're one of the best football players in the world. So Eric Reid has every right to play in the NFL, and he should take advantage of that opportunity for him. And he is, and yet that's not mutually exclusive with him with him selling out. I don't see that at all, or it doesn't mean he's selling out. I don't see it's mutually exclusive with him shutting up. He doesn't need to shut up. He can keep talking. He's doing the right thing. I think he has a point on that. And in terms of Jay-Z capitalizing from this, well, he is. That doesn't mean that he hasn't already, like, I can disagree with what Reed said is Jay-Z sacrificed nothing. I could disagree with the sentiment that this won't do anything, if that is a sentiment. I think you can argue Jay-Z's point of view, but let's not pretend that Reed doesn't have a point. Jay-Z now has a very powerful partnership with a very powerful entertainment entity, which will enrich Jay-Z and his business partners, right? Like, that will also happen. So, yeah, Reed has a point. He has a couple of them.
I disagree. I don't think, and I'm very uncomfortable having a conversation about Eric Reed because I genuinely like and respect who he is and what he stands for and what his position has been. I really, really do. But I think he's missing the boat on a couple of things here. And it's not to say he doesn't have any points. I get where you're coming from, Max. But I'm talking about as it pertains to what the intent of his words are. I don't think he's making the right point here. The reality of the situation is that Colin Kaepernick protested to bring attention to the racial oppression that exists in our society. He stood up. He made a sacrifice. We recognize that and we appreciate that. But in the same breath, we need to understand that everybody's entitled to embrace it differently. Colin Kaepernick didn't make this move for Colin Kaepernick. Colin Kaepernick supposedly, ostensibly, made it for a bigger reason, to affect the lives of so many others, even if it sacrificed himself. Well, guess what? Now it has. So what's the surprise there? You have to understand that. If Jay-Z decides to collaborate with the NFL and use the strong arm of the NFL to impact communities, disenfranchised communities throughout our nation in a very, very positive way, then excuse me, wasn't that the goal that Colin Kaepernick had? Wasn't that the goal that Eric Reed had? Wasn't that the goal that a plethora of other people who supported them had? It wasn't about getting Colin Kaepernick back in the NFL. It was about making sure that the issues that Colin Kaepernick illuminated for all of us were being addressed. And if those things are being addressed, then that was the ultimate goal. It's not just about you. Secondly, Eric Reed is talking this talk while he's wearing an NFL uniform. And there are nuggets of information that he's ignored along the way. Number one, blackballed from the NFL. Do I believe that's the case right now with Colin Kaepernick? Sure. But let's keep in mind what transpired. The Baltimore Ravens were interested in him until he compared Bisciotti and former player, Hall of Famer Ray Lewis, to the characters in Django, Samuel L. Jackson and Leonardo DiCaprio. The Miami Dolphins were interested in him until he showed up at a press conference with a Fidel Castro T-shirt, Miami populace that exceeds 30%, and with Cuban Americans there. Okay, so there were teams that were interested in him. Eric Reed, blackballed Eric Reed. I'm sorry, I thought he was playing for the Carolina Panthers. I thought I saw him play last year for the Carolina Panthers. I thought I saw him register 50 tackles. I do believe he's getting a paycheck from the Carolina Panthers right now. And so when I look at it from that perspective, I'm like, what are you talking about? Because you're in the National Football League. Now, third point, when we talk about the NFL, we can talk about the NFL. We can talk about ESPN. Let me explain something. We don't cut checks. We cash them. We don't own the NFL. We don't own ESPN. The NFL is perfectly within their right to sit up there and say, yo, we really don't have a problem with your position. Our problem is with our patrons, who we believe, this is at the time, not now, because obviously that's proven to be wrong. But at the time, their position was, we have a right to sit up there and say, this is going to have a negative impact on our bottom line. We just about football. Eric Reed confirmed that Colin Kaepernick, him, and others, their position was never against the NFL until the NFL went about the business of quote-unquote blackballing. Well, where did the blackballing come from? They said, you are affecting our bottom line in a negative context. We need you to alter that a little bit because we don't have anything to do with this.
Right.
Colin Kaepernick refused.
If you want us to whiteball you, you better get in line.
Okay, guys.
Well, look, time out. You can do all of that, Max. Feel free. I'll give you the floor to do all of that. I ain't getting into all of that. What I'm saying to you is this. They came to them and said, you're affecting our money. Now, if you had a problem with the National Football League initially, I got nothing to say. The problem was Eric Reed and Colin Kaepernick said their issue wasn't with the NFL. So if your issue wasn't with the NFL, but the NFL is saying they're suffering because of your actions and you're employed by them, you're ostensibly saying your employer who employs you, who you need to pay you, is saying you're affecting their bottom line. And in essence, you're saying, bump you. I don't give a damn about your bottom line. I'm going to do what I want to do while I'm in your league with my hand out for your money. Now, that's not the real world. The real world is not going to accept you doing that. And that's the reality that we all have to face. There's a lot of things, Max, you want to say, I want to say, etc. But we're on ESPN's airwaves. These are not Stephen A. Smith's airwaves. These are not Max Kellerman's airwaves. These are ESPN's airwaves. And damn it, if they sit up there and say, yo, you affecting our bottom line, us, Walt Disney, etc., we need to have a conversation about this. If you're smart, you need to have a damn conversation.
Stephen A., okay, this is getting really good. So let's call an audible here and continue this conversation when we get back. I'm sure you have plenty more that you want to say.
Both of us do. Let's go.
On First Take, much more on this Jay-Z, Eric Reed, Colin Kaepernick, and the NFL, the partnership and the fallout. Stay right here.
The NFL season is right around the corner.
Excitement is building as training camp begins.
The break, we were discussing these tweets by Eric Reed on Roc Nation's partnership with the NFL. You and some others seem to misunderstand that we had no beef with the NFL until they started perpetuating the systemic oppression that we are fighting by blackballing Colin and then me. Now, I won't quit playing but I will be a royal pain in the NFL's you-know-what for acting like they care about people of color by forming numerous disingenuous partnerships to address social injustice while collectively blackballing Colin, the person who brought oppression and social injustice to the forefront of the NFL platform. Earlier, I asked, does Reed have a point? Max said yes. Stephen A. said no. Max, you're up in terms of responding.
First, let me just comment on that comment again one more time. Then I want to respond to Stephen A. I don't know, I'm not agreeing, Stephen A., with the idea that changing behavior isn't the most important thing. Eric Reed is a little hung up, in my view, in changing hearts and minds. I don't really care what the motivation for the NFL changing behavior, or even if that includes just funneling resources towards this issue. As long as they're doing it, that's great. So I don't agree with every sentiment he expresses, but he does have several points to make. I want to get first to your, and because a lot of times when social issues come up, you and I discuss them because we see them similarly, and where we have disagreements, we don't exactly debate them. I think this is a debate right now. As it relates to what you said about our, what we can and can't say on ESPN, using that as an analogy, because it's not our airwaves, it's ESPN's airwaves. I actually think that's a bad analogy unless you mean to prove my point. Because Colin Kaepernick and Eric Reed, let's start with Eric Reed. He was unemployed for a while, not on the merits. He's a good player. He didn't have a deal because he didn't participate in a voluntary ceremony. And the NFL said, because you didn't parrot our political speech, because after all, if kneeling for the flag is political speech, then certainly standing for it is too. Since you didn't parrot our political speech, we are not going to hire you. I'm not sure, as I bring this point up all the time when this issue comes up, I know constitutional guarantees of speech don't extend to the workplace in all ways, but I am not sure that they don't extend there. In other words, can an employer insist that their employees parrot their political speech or else they won't be employed? So that's number one. He didn't have a job. He didn't break any rules. If we broke a rule, that would be different. But that's not the case here. It's very different. Secondly, I agree with the gist of Eric Reed's point in this sense, Stephen A. While you and I see eye to eye about, look, the most important thing is changing behavior and actually getting results, that's really the most important thing. But I do think symbols are important. And I think Colin Kaepernick wins no matter what happens. Let's say he never gets another job. His martyrdom simply grows, and his legend and will increase over time. And he will be remembered as a significant figure of this era in the kind of American popular culture landscape. out of proportion to his accomplishments on the football field, certainly. That will grow if he never gets a job. On the other hand, the fact that he doesn't have a job, like he also wins if he gets the job. If he's unemployed, let's not forget what you said in the beginning of all this with Kaepernick. Careful, Colin, because all these people who are supporting you, are they going to pay your bills? That is often the refrain of people at a given time when someone risks something protesting, speaking truth to power, or protesting the powers that be. And Stephen A., in a way, that point that you made will be reinforced for future generations. Be careful before you martyr yourself, because who's going to pay your bills kind of thing. You are dealing with powers that can do things that you can do nothing about. And so that symbol is important. Whether or not the NFL is successful in unfairly denying Colin Kaepernick the chance to work, because he was certainly, when last seen, one of the 64 best quarterbacks in the world. And I agree with you about the Castro shirt, by the way. I've always been against him doing that. Castro is terrible. People should not support him, etc. I don't think that's up for debate or should be seriously entertained even. It's obvious on its face. And especially if you're in Miami and you do that, I can understand your reasoning there. And I agree with that in the case of the Miami Dolphins. But that's the only one to me that really has an excuse. Otherwise, he's been unfairly denied, drummed out of the league for not parroting his employer's political speech. It's BS, and Reed is right.
Well, first of all, you and I disagree when you bring up parroting the NFL's speech. I don't view it that way. I don't view the NFL as asking you to parrot their speech at all, because I don't view them as speaking. I view them as business people who happen to be white, obviously separated and disassociated from the plight that exists with minority communities, particularly blacks. And as a result, in most instances, is absolutely clueless, and more importantly, do not care about anything but their bottom line. It's not like they asked Colin Kaepernick to say something specifically. What they did was say, excuse me, this political position that you're taking, could you do it off the football field on Sundays? Could you go and do it somewhere else as opposed to bringing it to our NFL field of play? Because we believe that's going to compromise our bottom line. That is not asking somebody to parrot political speech. That is asking somebody to take your speech and take it somewhere else, since you don't have a problem with us. Now, if Colin Kaepernick and Eric Reed said, we have a problem with the NFL, and that was the reason they used the NFL field as a platform, that would be entirely different. That's not what they did. They used the NFL field to disseminate a message with aiming for mass appeal and mass attention. And they got it. But the problem is, what came along with it is the NFL saying, yo, we don't really have anything to do with this, and we're not going to let you potentially compromise our bottom line because of it. Because remember, where it really, really heated up was when the president of the United States called them a bunch of SOBs and that he fired all of them. That's when everybody really raised up. Prior to that, there was just a few people kneeling. That's it. They were pretty much standing alone. Now let me get to your point. When we talk about the National Football League, we talk about Eric Reed having a point. We're understanding where you're coming from. Your level of sensitivity, Max, is greatly appreciated. As a black man, and some of the things that you've expressed, I appreciate it, and I thank you for it. But what I would also like to ask you to do in return is to understand that as a black man, I'm going to have a different point of view, because I'm going to think about the collateral damage that ultimately it could potentially have upon us that might never affect people that look like you. The reality of the situation is, Eric Reed, in that quote, how many people are getting away with that? Colin Kaepernick and his defiant position, although completely justified towards society, maybe not necessarily the NFL. How many people are going to get away with that? You got people on social media sitting up there, sticking out their chest. Go ahead, Colin Kaepernick, go ahead. And I'm saying, when you encourage people to act in such a way, think about Eric Reed here. He went up against Malcolm Jenkins. We going to call Malcolm Jenkins a sellout? Is that what we going to do? We going to act like he wasn't thinking about the minority communities throughout this nation when he was able to generate about $89 million from owners, which, by the way, should have been more. Please don't get me wrong. But he was working with the Players of Coalition. We're going to try to call him a sellout. What are we going to do now? We're going to sit up there, and because Jay-Z is a capitalist and he made a business deal, we're going to suddenly forget that Jay-Z has been speaking out and speaking up on a plethora of issues that affect the minority communities throughout this nation and throughout this world for years and years and years. Anywhere you go, all over the world, you've got people of minority descent, African American and beyond, that rave about Jay-Z, and not just his abilities as a rap artist, but his conscience. And because he's smart enough and adroit enough to know how to go about the business of making business deals that will in turn enable him to use the strong arm of the NFL to affect communities throughout this world, we're going to sit up there and just dismiss him as some sellout dude that's just thinking about business, and suddenly we're going to question whether or not the black card should be stripped from him. I think that's criminal. I think that's egregious. The fact of the matter is, Colin Kaepernick did not protest for Colin Kaepernick. Eric Reid did not protest just for Colin Kaepernick. They protested for blackness. They protested because of racial oppression. They protested because black folks have been dealing with stuff that is just, it's ridiculous and it's criminal for decades, if not centuries. That's what they've been speaking up about. And now this is an effort to address it. And because Colin Kaepernick wasn't called or he wasn't consulted, we gonna sit up here and denigrate Jay-Z? Come on now. Come on now.
Stephen A.,
I don't agree with that.
First, let me say I appreciate.
And I'm not saying you. By the way, I'm not saying you would denigrate Jay-Z.
No, I understand. I got it.
I want to talk about you.
Make it clear to the people. I appreciate your point about saying you're a black man in America who cares about the fortunes of, let's say, young black people in America, or African Americans, period.
Yes, I do.
And so it's easy for me to stand up or sit up here and say on TV that you should be principled and take risks and chances when those don't affect, those kind of positions don't affect someone who looks like me the same way that they affect others, right? I appreciate that point of view. That's why it's incumbent upon me now to say, and people like me to say, wait a minute, Kaepernick still doesn't have a job. It should not go down like that. It should not be the case that here's yet another example when standing up for what you believe in costs a young black man his job, right? Like, or has that kind of an impact on a person of color, unfairly denied his right to work. Now, the reason I say it's political speech, and I think it clearly is that you're starting from the premise that, no, it's not. This is just a popular thing for them to do. Yes, it's a popular political position for the NFL to take an anthem ceremony. But in fact, standing up for the flag is a form of speech. In fact, if you're going to argue that kneeling is also a form of speech, it can't be one but not the other.
Max, here's how I can prove what I'm saying about the NFL. Marshawn Lynch, beast mode, acknowledged that on many occasions he didn't stand for the national anthem.
Right.
On one video, we saw him during the national anthem sitting on a bench eating a banana while the national anthem was being played. No one said anything, including the NFL. Why did they say something when it came to Colin Kaepernick? Initially, they didn't say anything to him. And then all of a sudden, the reporters started reporting it. It started gaining momentum, and as a result, there was a constituency out there that was speaking so vehemently against it that it scared the owners in terms of them believing it would affect their bottom line. So it's not about political speech. It's about their money.
Well,
and they were saying, yo, we don't want it to affect our money. That's what happened.
I'm not saying the NFL isn't worried about the bottom line, and that's not what motivated their actual behavior. About that, we can agree for the most part. I do think there's an impulse with the owners, who are billionaires who are used to getting their way, to want people to stay in their place. Especially some kinds of people, it seems to me.
Sure, but that's everywhere. Absolutely right. I'm not disputing that.